Hello and welcome to my channel today, Boo Snakes and More. Today we're going to be talking about taxonomic biology, so please like this video and subscribe to the channel. In biology, taxonomy, from ancient Greek, root, text, agreement, and void normal method, is the scientific study of naming, defining, cribsabing, and classifying groups of biological organisms based on shared characteristics. Modern approaches prioritize common ancestry and evolutionary relationships. Organisms are grouped into taxa, single taxon, and these groups are given a taxonomic rank. Groups of a given rank can be agitated to form a more inclusive group of higher rank, this creating a taxonomic hierarchy. The principal ranks in modern use are domain, kingdom, phylum. Division is sometimes used in botany in place of phylum. Class, order, family, genus, and species. The Swedish botanist Linus is regarded as the founder of the current system of taxonomy, having developed a ranked system known as Linnean taxonomy for categorizing organisms, with advances in the theory, data, and lineage technology of biological systematics. The Linnean system has transformed into a system of modern biological classification intended to reflect the evolutionary relationships among organisms, both living and extinct. The exact definition of taxonomy varies from source to source, but the core of the discipline remains the conception, naming, and classification of groups of organisms. As points of reference, recent definitions of taxonomy are presented below. Theory and practice of grouping individuals into species, arranging species into larger groups, and giving those groups names, this producing a classification. A field of science and a major contempt of systematics that encompasses description, identification, nomenclature, and classification. The science of classification is biological, the arrangement of organisms into classification. The science of classification as applied to living organisms, including the study of means of formation of species, etc., the analysis of organisms' characteristics for the purpose of classification, systematic studies pathology to provide a pattern that can be translated into the classification and names of the more inclusive field of taxonomy, listed as a desirable but unusual definition. The very definitions either place taxonomy as a sub-area of systematics, definition 2, invert that relationship, definition 6, or appear to consider the two terms synonymous. There is some disagreement as to whether biological nomenclature is considered a part of taxonomy, definitions 1 and 2, or a part of systematics outside taxonomy. For example, definition 6 is paired with the following definition of systematics that places numeral culture outside taxonomy. Systematics, the study of the identification, taxonomy, and numeral culture of organisms, including the classification of living things with regard to their natural relationships, in the study of variation and the evolution of taxa. In 1970, Moshe Al defined systematic biology and taxonomy in relation to one another as follows. Systematic biology, therefore called simply systematics, is the field that A. provides scientific names for organisms, B. describes them, C. preserves collections of them, D. provides classifications for the organisms, keys for their identification and data on their distributions, E. investigates their evolutionary histories, and F. considers their environmental adaptations. This is a field with a long history that in recent years has experienced a notable resurgence, principally with respect to theatrical content. Part of the theatrical material has to do with evolutionary areas. Topics E and F above. The rest relates especially to the problem of classification. Taxonomy is that part of systematics concerned with topics A to D above. A whole set of terms including taxonomy, systematic biology, systematics, scientific classification, biological classification, and phylogenetics have at times had overlapping meanings, sometimes the same, sometimes slightly different, but always related and intersecting. The broadest meaning of taxonomy is used here. The term itself was introduced in 1813 by D. Candler in his theory environmentally de la Blanquet. John Lindley provided an earlier definition of systematics in 1830, although he wrote of systematic botany rather than using the term systematics. Europeans tend to use the terms systematics and biosystematics for the study of biodiversity as a whole, whereas North Americans tend to use taxonomy more frequently. However, taxonomy, and in particularly alpha taxonomy, is more specifically the identification, description, and naming, i.e. nomenclature of organisms, while classification focuses on placing organisms within hierarchical groups that show their relationships to other organisms. Monograph and taxonomic revision. A taxonomic revision or taxonomic review is a novel analysis of the variation patterns in a particular taxon. This analysis may be elevated on the basis of any combination of the various available kinds of characters, such as morphological, autonomical, paleoneurological, biochemical, and genetic. A monograph or complete revision is a revision that is comprehensive for a taxon for the information given at a particular time and for the entire world. Other partial revisions may be restricted in the sense that they may only use some of the available character sets or have a limited spectral scope. A revision results in a confirmation of or new insights in the relationships between the subtaxa within the taxon under study, which may lead to a change in the classification of these subtaxa, the identification of new subtaxa, or the merger of previous subtaxa. Taxonomic characters. Taxonomic characters are the taxonomic attributes that can be used to provide the evidence from which relationships, the pathogenealogy between taxa are inferred. Kinds of taxonomic characters include methodological characters, general or extraordinary methodology, special statutes, e.g. genitalia, internal methodology, anatomy, immeasurably, congruently, or other categorical factors, psychological characters, metabolic factors, body sections, generic celerity factors, molecular characters, immunological distance, electropathical differences, amino acid sequences of proteins, DNA hybridization, DNA and RNA sequences, restriction into lactose analysis, other molecular differences, behavior characteristics, courtship and other ethological isolating mechanisms, other behavior patterns, ecological characteristics, habit and habitats, food, seasonal variations, parasites and hosts, geographical characteristics, general biographical distribution patterns, symptomatic, areopathic relationship of populations, alpha and beta taxonomy. The term alpha taxonomy is primarily used to refer to the discipline of finding, describing, and naming taxa, particularly species. In earlier literature, the term had a different meaning, referring to morphological taxonomy in the products of research through the end of the 19th century. William Bartman Tillrue introduced the term alpha taxonomy in a series of papers published in 1935 and 1937, in which he discussed the philosophy and possible future directions of the discipline of taxonomy. There is an increasing desire amongst taxonomists to consider their problems from wider viewpoints, to investigate the possibilities of closer cooperation with their chronological, ecological, and genetics colleagues, and to acknowledge that some revision or expansion, perhaps of a drastic nature, of their aims and methods may be desirable. Tilly, 1935, has suggested that while accepting the older and valuable taxonomy based on structure and conveniently designed alpha, it is possible to glimpse a far distant taxonomy built upon as wide a base of morphological and psychological facts as possible, and one in which place is found for all observational and experimental data relating, even if indirectly, to the constitution, subdivision, origin, conservation, subdivision, origin, and behavior of species and their other taxonomic groups. Ideals can, it may be said, never be completely realized. They have, however, a great value of acting as permanent stimulants, and if we have some even vague ideal of an omega taxonomy, we may progress a little way down the Greek alphabet. Some of us please ourselves by thinking we are now groping in a beta taxonomy. Dryness, this exceptionally excludes from alpha taxonomy various areas of study that he includes within taxonomy as a whole, such as elology, psychology, genetics, including categonology. He further excludes pathogenetic reconstruction from alpha taxonomy. Later authors have used the term in a different sense to mean the determination of species, not subspecies or taxa of other ranks, using whatever investigative techniques are available, and including sophisticated, contemporary, or laboratory techniques. This Ernest Mayer in 1968 defined beta taxonomy as a classification of ranks higher than species. An understanding of the biological meaning of variation and of the evolutionary origin of groups of related species is even more important for the second stage of taxonomic activity, the sorting of species into groups of relatives, taxa, and their arrangement in a hierarchy of higher categories. This activity is what the term classification denotes. It is also referred to as beta taxonomy, microtaxonomy, and macrotaxonomy. How species should be defined in a particular group of organisms gives rise to practical and theoretical problems that are referred to as species problem. This scientific work of deciding how to define species has been called microtaxonomy. By extension, megataxonomy is the study of groups at the higher taxonomic ranks, subgenus and above, or simply in clades that include more than one taxon considered a species expressed in terms of phylogenetic nomenclature. History. Why some descriptions of taxonomic history attempt to date taxonomy to ancient civilizations. A truly scientific attempt to classify organisms did not occur until the 18th century, with the possible exception of Astral, whose works hint at taxonomy. Earlier works were primarily deceptive and focused on plants that were used for agriculture or medicine. There were a number of stages in the scientific thinking. Early taxonomy was based on ability, curricula, and the so-called artificial systems, including linear system of sexual classification for plants. Linear 1735 classification of animals was entitled Systema Nature, the System of Nature, implying that he at least believed that it was more than an artificial system. Later came systems based on a more complete consideration of the characteristics of taxa, referred to as natural systems, such as those of De Geselu, 1789, De Candolle, 1813, and Betham and Hooker, 1862 to 1863. These classifications described empirical patterns and were pre-evolutionary in thinking. The publication of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, 1859, led to a new explanation for classifications based on evolutionary relationships. This was the concept of palynylic systems from 1883 onwards. This approach was typified by those of Elocker, 1883, and Engler, 1886 to 1892. The advent of catalytic methodology in the 1970s led to classifications based on the sole creatine of monopathy, supported by the presence of synopsis.
Do you know what you're having for supper tonight?
Polymacaroni. Since then, the evidentiary basis has been expanded with data from molecular genetics that, for the most part, complements traditional morphology. Pre-Lenin, early taxonomists, naming and classifying human surroundings likely began with the onset of language, distinguishing poisonous plants from edible plants is integral to the survival of human communities. Medically, plant illustrations show up in Egyptian wall paintings from c. 1500 BC, indicating that the uses of different species were understood and that a basic taxonomy was in place. Ancient times, organisms were first classified by Astral, ancient Greece, 384 through 322 BC. During his stay on the island of Lesbos, he classified beings by their parts, or in modern terms, attributes, such as having live birth, having 4 legs, laying eggs, having blood, or being warm-bodied. He divided all living things into 2 groups, plants and animals. Some of his groups of animals, such as Amelia, animals without blood, translated as invertebrates, and Earthamelia, animals with blood, roughly the vertebrates, as well as groups like the sharks and crustaceans, are commonly used. His student, Theoplactus, Greece 370 through 285 BC carried on this tradition, mentioning some 500 plants and their uses in its Histra Plantuma. Several plant genera can be traced back to Thombatus, such as Cornelius, Caucasus, and Narcissus. Medieval taxonomy in the Middle Ages was largely based on the Assyrian system, with additions concerning the physiological and extraterrestrial order of creatures. This included concepts such as the Great Chain of Being in the Western Scholastic tradition, again deriving ultimately from Astro. The Australian system did not classify plants or fungi due to the lack of microscopes at the time, as his ideas were based on arranging the complete world in a single continuum as per the scale nature, the natural ladder. This as well was taken into consideration in the Great Chain of Being. Advances were made by scholars such as Praecius, Timosius of Gonza, Demosus, Papagamius, and Thomas August. Medieval thinkers used abstract, physiological, and logical categorizations more suited to abstract physiological than to paradigmatic taxonomy. In the Muslim world, Al-Damian d. 1405 wrote an influential work called Life of Animals, Hulur Hulun Akabu, circa 1371, which treats an alphabetic order of 931 animals mentioned in the Quran. The traditions in the poetic and proverbial literature of the Arabs, Renaissance and early modern. During the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment, categorizing organisms became more prevalent, and taxonomic works became ambitious enough to replace the ancient texts. This is sometimes credited to the development of sophisticated optical lenses, which allowed the morphological of organisms to be studied in much greater detail. One of the earliest authors to take advantage of this leap in technology was the Italian physician Andrea Caspinio, 1519 to 1603, who has been called the first taxonomist. His magnum opus, De Plantis, came out in 1583 and described more than 1,500 plant species. Two large plant families that he first recognized are still in use: the Ascuri and Biscui. In the 17th century, John Ray England, 1627 to 1705, wrote many important taxonomic works. Arguably his greatest accomplishment was Metahodis Petroleum Nova 1682, in which he published details of over 18,000 plant species. At the time, his classifications were perhaps the most complex yet produced by any taxonomist, as he based his taxa on many combined characters. The next major taxonomic works were produced by Joseph Pinton de Turlefront, France, 1656 to 1708. His work from 1700 institutions, Rea Herbadia, included more than 9,000 species in 698 genera, which directly influenced Linnaeus, as it was the text he used as a young student. Linear era. The Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, 1707 to 1778, ushered in a new era of taxonomy with his major works, Systema Naturae, first edition in 1735, Species Plantama in 1753, and Systema Naturae 10th edition. He revolutionized modern taxonomy. His works implemented a standardized binomial naming system for animal and plant species, which proved to be an elegant solution to a chaotic and disorganized taxonomic literature. He not only introduced the standard of class, order, genres, and species, but also made it possible to identify plants and animals from his book by using the smaller parts of the flower, known as the Linnean system. Plant and animal taxonomists regard Linnaeus' work as the starting point for valid names at 1753 and 1758, respectively. Names published before these dates are referred to as pre-Linnean and not considered valid, with the exception of spiders published in Slovakia Splendorin. Even taxonomic names published by Linnaeus himself before these dates are considered pre-Linnean. Thank you for watching this video, and peace out till the next one.